Have you ever had the unsettling sense that you've already lived this exact moment before, not as a memory, but as a recognition that arrives too fast to explain? It happens quietly. You're in the middle of an ordinary day, doing something forgettable, and suddenly there's a pause inside you, not confusion, not fear, just a subtle awareness that something about reality feels off, as if time didn't quite move forward, but folded. As if your mind noticed a pattern before your thoughts could catch up. Most people brush this off. They call it coincidence, stress, imagination. But some people don't. Some people carry that feeling with them for years. The sense that life repeats itself in strange ways. That conversation's echo, that choices lead back to familiar outcomes, no matter how carefully you try to change course. If that's ever been you, it doesn't mean you're dramatic or broken. It means you're perceptive. Research into quantum consciousness and human perception has shown that not everyone experiences reality the same way. Certain minds are more sensitive to patterns, more aware of subtle inconsistencies in what we call normal life. And once you notice a hidden reality beneath the surface, it becomes impossible to unsee it. You start wondering why effort doesn't always lead to change, why insight doesn't always bring movement, why awareness sometimes feels like being stuck rather than free. This isn't spirituality. It isn't motivation. It's an uncomfortable question science is only beginning to circle around. And before this moment passes, there's something important you need to see, because the next piece of this puzzle explains why, for some people, nothing seems to change, no matter what they do. If any of this resonates, let it register quietly. A simple acknowledgement, something as small as a click, can act as a private marker that this perspective aligns with how you already experience the world. And if you choose to stay, you're stepping into a space shaped by people who sense there's more happening beneath the surface. If you're willing, leave a short thought that begins with, "I've been feeling," or "This made me notice." Not to explain yourself, just to capture the moment. Because what comes next isn't opinion or belief. It's grounded in real observation, and it changes how this pattern starts to make sense. In 2000, a team led by physicist Yoon-Ho Kim, working with Marlin Scully's group at the University of Maryland, carried out what's now known as the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. It followed earlier work proposed in 1982, but this version made the implications impossible to ignore. In simple terms, particles of light were sent through a setup similar to the classic double-slit experiment. When no information existed about which path a particle took, the results formed an interference pattern behavior we associate with waves. When that information was available, even in principle, the pattern vanished and the particles behaved like solid objects. The unsettling part was timing. The choice to preserve or erase that information was made after the particle had already been detected. Nothing mystical happened. No particle traveled backward in time. What changed was the context in which the event became real. The observer effect here isn't about human eyes or intention. It's about information. The quantum field responded not to action, but to what could be known. Reality didn't settle until the conditions of observation were complete. And this means that you are living inside a system where outcomes aren't fully locked in until context catches up. If you've ever felt like your efforts don't translate cleanly into results, or that life seems to wait, hesitate, or repeat before moving forward, that tension isn't irrational. It mirrors something fundamental about how reality behaves at its most basic level. Consciousness expansion, in this sense, isn't about becoming more of anything. It's about noticing how deeply perception and structure are entangled. Many people quietly sense this. The feeling that something doesn't resolve when it should. The awareness that clarity doesn't always produce change. That recognition isn't a belief, it's a response to inconsistency. And the more sensitive you are to patterns, the harder it is to ignore. But this experiment is only the first fracture in the surface. There's another concept less famous, more uncomfortable, that pushes this even further. And it forces a question about why reality sometimes seems to resist change altogether. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, research led by Roland McCratty at the HeartMath Institute began documenting something that felt counterintuitive to many neuroscientists at the time. Using heart rate variability measurements, They showed that the nervous system doesn't operate as a simple top-down command from the brain. Instead, the heart and brain function as a coupled system, exchanging information continuously through electrical, neurological, and biochemical signals. When this system enters a state of physiological coherence, perception, reaction time, and emotional regulation change measurably. Not metaphorically, measurably. And this explains why moments of sudden clarity don't always feel like thoughts. They arrive as sensations first, a quiet steadiness in the chest, a brief stillness where mental noise drops out, a sharpened awareness where your attention feels wider but calmer at the same time. These aren't mystical signals. They're shifts in how your nervous system is synchronizing information. When coherence increases, the body processes reality with less internal friction, and perception becomes cleaner. What's rarely discussed is that coherence isn't something you decide to enter. It emerges when internal signals stop competing. Studies showed that in coherent states, incoming information is interpreted differently, with less emotional distortion. That doesn't change reality, but it changes how reality is registered. In the context of the observer effect and the quantum field, this matters. Not because the body alters physics, but because perception shapes which details become dominant and which fade into the background. Many people who feel different describe this without language for it: a sensitivity to environments, a discomfort in noisy spaces, an intuition that feels physical before it becomes mental. That's not a personality flaw. It's a nervous system that detects incoherence quickly, both internally and externally. Consciousness expansion, in this frame, isn't about elevation. It's about tolerance. The more aware you become, the harder it is to ignore misalignment, and that awareness carries a cost. Because once you notice how deeply perception, coherence, and meaning are linked, it becomes harder to participate unconsciously. Understanding this doesn't just clarify reality, it quietly changes your relationship to yourself. And that shift is where things start to feel heavier, more personal, and harder to explain. What rarely gets said out loud is that noticing these patterns doesn't feel empowering at first. It often feels isolating. There's a quiet loneliness that comes with realizing you're paying attention to things others move past without friction. You might question your self-wonder if you're overthinking, if you're reading meaning where there is none, or if you've somehow stepped just slightly out of sync with the world you're supposed to belong to. And that doubt can be heavy. Not traumatic, just persistent. It shows up in conversations where you hold back, in moments where enthusiasm feels forced, in the strange fatigue of seeing problems before they surface, but not knowing how to explain them. This isn't about ego in the usual sense. It's about the fracture that happens when your internal experience stops matching the shared script. When awareness increases, comfort often decreases. You start noticing how much of daily life runs on autopilot, how often certainty is borrowed rather than examined. And once you see that, pretending not to notice becomes its own kind of strain. Some people feel this as distance, others as self-doubt, others as a quiet grief for the simplicity they can't return to. If any of that feels familiar, you don't need to label it or fix it, just recognize it. This space isn't for everyone, and it isn't meant to be. It's for those moments when something inside you nods, almost reluctantly, in recognition. And while that recognition comes with weight, it also carries something else in opening, because understanding the cost of awareness is what makes it possible to see what it offers in return. What emerges from all of this, if you step back far enough to see it clearly, is not a diagnosis or a flaw, but a reframing. The feeling of being different, out of step, or subtly misaligned doesn't point to something missing in you. It points to something extra. Across this journey, we've seen how reality itself doesn't behave as a fixed mechanical backdrop. In the delayed choice experiment, outcomes waited for context. In physiological coherence, perception shifted before thought followed. In each case, reality responded not to force, but to conditions of awareness. Taken together, these ideas suggest a quieter truth. Some people register those conditions more acutely. Not better, not worse, just differently. If you've felt that effort doesn't always lead to movement, or that awareness sometimes creates friction instead of comfort, that experience isn't evidence of failure. It may be the natural tension of perceiving more variables at once. A wider field of information can slow certainty, deepen doubt, and complicate belonging. This doesn't mean awareness is a gift without weight. It asks more of you. It removes easy narratives. It challenges the comfort of autopilot. And yet, it also offers coherence of another kind, the sense that your internal experience has a logic, even when it feels isolated. Not everything that resists resolution is broken. Some things resist because they're part of a system still unfolding. The unsettling question this leaves us with isn't how to fix ourselves, but how much of reality remains incomplete until it's perceived. If awareness plays a role not in controlling outcomes, but in when they settle into place, then understanding consciousness becomes less about answers and more about responsibility. And that opens a door we haven't stepped through yet, one that asks what happens when perception itself becomes the limiting factor. As this comes to a close, there's a final recognition that tends to arrive quietly, not as excitement, not as certainty, but as a sense of internal alignment. The realization that what you've been feeling all along wasn't confusion, weakness, or excess sensitivity, but a consistent response to how you perceive the world. If that recognition landed for you, even briefly, let it stand. And if continuing this exploration feels natural, staying connected here becomes less about following a channel and more about choosing a space where these questions are allowed to exist without being simplified. What follows next builds directly on this understanding. In the next video, this quantum effect explains why nothing changes. No matter what you do, the focus shifts to the tension many people feel after awareness sets in, the frustration of insight without movement, of effort that loops instead of progresses. It expands the pattern you've just seen and presses on it from another angle, one that's harder to ignore once you notice it. There's no rush, no obligation, just a continuation for those who feel the pull to look a little deeper and sit with questions most people avoid. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.